Thank you. Good afternoon. I'd like to call the meeting to order. This is the May the 3rd Public Works Committee meeting, and members of the public are advised that our meetings are webcast live by the city and temporarily archived on the city's website. As well, a reminder that all electronic devices are to be switched to a non-audible function during these committee meetings. Members are reminded of the 5-minute time limit, which will be adhered to during the meeting. Members can submit another request to speak if they require more time to ask questions or make comments. I'll now commence with a roll call. Please indicate your presence when I call your name. Councillor Collins.
Present. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Councillor Jackson.
Here, Chair Vanderbeek.
Lovely. Good afternoon, Councillor Jackson. Councillor Pauls.
I'm here. Thank you.
Good. Councillor Danko.
Good afternoon. Present.
Good afternoon. Councillor Marula.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. Present.
Councillor Pearson.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. Present.
Good afternoon. Councillor Farr.
Madam Chair, present.
Thank you. Councillor Nan.
Good afternoon, Chair Vanderbeek. Present.
Thank you. Councillor Ferguson.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. And Councillor Whitehead is absent with approval. Moving on. Approval of the agenda. Madam Clerk, are there any changes to the agenda?
Yes, Madam Chair, we do have a number of changes to today's agenda. We have an added communication item, correspondence from Spin Mobility Incorporated, respecting item 10.1. The recommendation is that be received and referred to the consideration of that item on the agenda. We have 5 added delegation requests, all also respecting item 10.1, which is the commercial e-scooter operations report. We have Walter Carnes, Chris Schaefer from Bird Canada, Shoaib Ahmed from Scooty, Jamie Stuckless, and Larissa Proctor from the CNIB Foundation. We have 2 added notices of motion, item 12.2, which is a private tree giveaway for Ward 7, and item 12.3, respecting the installation of traffic calming measures at various locations throughout the Westdale and Ainsleywood neighborhoods in Ward 1. And those are the changes.
Thank you. May I please have a mover and seconder to approve the agenda as amended? Councillor Nan and Councillor Pauls. Is there any discussion on the agenda? Okay, and we'll require an electronic vote. Please vote. And the vote carried 10-0. Declarations of interest? Seeing none. We'll have approval of the minutes of the previous meeting from April the 19th, 2021. May I please have a mover and seconder to approve those minutes? Councillor Pearson, seconded by Councillor Marula. Thank you. Is there any discussion on the minutes? Seeing none. The vote is on your. Thank you, and that carries unanimously. And communications, which is item 10. No, it's item 5, sorry. Correspondence, 5.1 is correspondence from Spin Mobility, 5.1, sorry. I'm having a little trouble here, can you tell? All right, so we have I'm on page 4. Correspondence from Spin Mobility, which is 5.1. May I please have a mover and a seconder to receive and refer the correspondence from Spin Mobility respecting item number 10.1. Is there any discussion? Councillor Farr? No? You're moving it? Thank you. And a seconder? Councillor Danko. And it'll be an electronic vote. Thank you. And thank you. That carries unanimously. Item 6.1, delegation requests respecting item 10.1, commercial e-scooters and operations. We have 6.1A through 6.1E. May I have a mover and a seconder to approve the delegation requests? Councillor Nan, seconded by Councillor Pauls. Thank you. And is there any discussion on that? On any of those? Okay, we'll have an electronic vote. It's on. And that carries unanimously. Thank you. Item 7 is consent items. 7.1 is the water treatment plant bypass. May I please have a mover and seconder to receive 7.1? Moved by Councillor Pearson, seconded by Councillor Farr. Any discussion on that item? Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you. Through to Mark.
Councillor Ferguson,
When we
can I
had the
ask you to-
Shuttle Creek problem with
Councillor Ferguson, I'm sorry, your voice is breaking up. Could I ask you to turn your video off just while you're speaking?
Sure.
Thank you.
Is that better?
Much better. Thank you.
Okay, so through you to Mark. Mark, when we had the Shuttle Creek valve there, council agreed. I think Councillor Jackson moved it to put some boots on the ground to coincide with the SCADA monitoring system, and then we're going to have individuals watch it also, and it included not just the CSO tanks but the pumping stations also. I think there was about 160 in total. And but now you're showing in table 1 that fully monitored dedication and volume is 12, partially monitored 3, and unmonitored 15. I'm not sure we're talking the same thing, but do we really have 15 facilities that are unmonitored, like CSO tanks?
Director Grace.
Sorry, through the chair, Andrew Grice, Director of Hamilton Water, and certainly Mark can chime in. I think the councillor directed it at Mark, but I'm happy to kick it off. And Mark, if you want to fill anything in, please do so. So councillor, there is 15 unmonitored sites. So this is not CSO tanks. These would be gate structures within our system, predominantly along the industrial strip of Burlington. But when you're looking at the fully monitored sites for detection and volume, those are referring more to our tanked systems like you would see at Main King and Eastwood Park. The unmonitored are more like a gate regulator structure.
Okay, because the table calls it CSO, which I believe stands for Combined Sewer Overflow Location Monitoring Summary, which indicated to me these are the big tanks, but you're telling me they're not then. It's something else? These are the same name?
Yeah, through the chair, they are something else. So combined sewer overflow, when we say combined sewer overflow tanks, that would be referring to our tank system. These are combined sewer overflow locations additionally throughout the city.
And what do they do? Did they control the flow on major storms, the same as the CSO tanks do?
Through the chair, they do. So, we can store material in our combined sewer overflow tanks during wet weather events as well. If there is additional material moving through the system, once the pipe reaches its capacity, these are the diversion structures that outlet to the natural environment.
Councillor.
Okay, do we need to be concerned then? We have 15 of these unmonitored? Because that was the problem at the one into Shuttle Creek, that nobody was aware that valve was open 5%, or that a second valve, there was a weld break on one of the gates. Do we need to have the same concern here?
Through the chair, I think it's good due diligence on our behalf to have visibility on as many locations as humanly possible. You'll see in the report, it laid out a couple of different scenarios. So I would point out that getting full monitoring at these 15 additional locations is not as simple as it sounds. Some of these are fully submerged under normal operating conditions, and it's not as easy as putting a flow monitor at the outlet. So we're actually talking about monitoring within our system at various points to represent these unmonitored locations. Table or option 2 that is in the report looks at monitoring at where we're going to say you're going to get the best value for high contributor overflows, but certainly something that is Hamilton Water we think is a good investment to give us proper visibility and also transparency with the public, because these would be added to our overflow and bypass monitoring webpage so we can share that information with the public.
And I interpret from this that option 2 is scenario 2 is your preferred.
Through the chair, I would say so. As much as I would love to have full visibility everywhere, that is a fairly significant investment. Certainly happy to kind of follow council's lead, but I think proposal 2 that is in front of us really does capture or balances financial investment with capture of high volume contributors.
Okay, that's all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Okay, and we'll require an electronic vote for this. I don't see any additional speakers, so the vote is on your screen. And we are dealing with item 7. And that carries unanimously. Thank you. 7.2 is an intersection control list. May I have a mover in Ward 9? May I have a mover and seconder to put it on the floor? Moved by Councillor Jackson, seconded by Councillor Pearson. Thank you. Is there any discussion? I see none, so we'll need an electronic vote. And it's on the screen. And that carries unanimously. Thank you. We're on item 9, which is public hearings and delegations. Members are reminded that questions of the delegations are for clarification purposes only and not for debate. Committee will receive all of the delegations together after the last presenter has completed their presentation. And the first presenter is James Kemp, Advisory Committee for Persons with Disabilities, respecting item 10.1. I'd call upon James Kemp. You can turn your video on, James, and your mic if you would. And just remind you that you have 5 minutes to present from whenever you start talking.
Thank you.
The floor is yours.
Hello, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for taking the time to hear from me today. I'm here representing the Advisory Committee for Persons with Disability in regard to commercial renter e-scooters and report PD 20134A. We are emphatically against commercially rented e-scooters operating on our streets. To some, they may appear a fun and easy way of getting around the city or as an alternative to cars in transit. To others, I'm sure it looks like a potential money-making program, indirect revenue, a draw for tourists, and is a selling point to any future company looking to invest in our fair city. To the disabled, it is a terrifying prospect. Deadly silent vehicles rocketing down our streets or landmines waiting to trip us up, even as roadblocks randomly put in our way. But this report states that you have addressed these issues and been done so without input from those directly affected. This report has missed obvious problems because it is based on experience with bicycles and from an able-bodied perspective. The e-scooter is not a bicycle and shouldn't be compared to it. Most of us had a lifetime to get accustomed to bicycles, their speed, their balance, how to operate them on the street, etc. E-scooters will operate for you on their first try, but you have no experience in dealing with the speed, top-heavy balance, sudden stops, or tight turning radius. Most of the injuries reported were to the operators themselves. Studies say roughly 80%. Predominantly head and face injuries, but also to the shoulder, elbow, and wrist. Some studies have reported as much as 8 times as many head injuries from e-scooters than bicycles due to the high center of gravity and predilection for pitching forwards in a sudden stop. Our infrastructure is not yet ready for them. We have very few bike lanes in the city as they're a relatively recent addition. Our road conditions are poor, especially near the curbs where these vehicles are expected to operate due to the freeze-thaw cycle. During my research, I found that the most successful cities already had extensive bike paths and bike lanes in place before the introduction of e-scooters. Hamilton doesn't have an extensive network of bike lanes and bike paths. These are areas of Hamilton where they're nearly impossible for these scooters to operate on the road only. For example, the downtown core. There are not enough bike lanes and the roads are too busy. It will be impossible to keep them off the sidewalks. This report says that the project is revenue neutral, but we don't think it is taking into all the related costs. There's no mention of the cost for extra police and bylaw officers needed to educate or regulate e-scooters. I spoke with an officer regarding the extra work of regulating them and was told that they would not cite anyone for e-scooter issues alone, only if it was relation to another matter. It also makes no mention of the increase in hospital emergency service costs due to e-scooter injuries. The platforms of the scooters are too plain. They will blend into the background of anyone with vision loss. There should be a garish mix of bright colors and unusual patterns that stand out and warn someone that there is danger. Blue, yellow, and red in patterns of dots, chevrons, jagged lines, etc. are recommended as it will ensure visibility no matter the person's vision. The citizens shouldn't be relied upon to report incorrectly parked e-scooters by phone. Why don't they have a call home button that anyone can hold down for a few seconds, alerting the company that it needs to be picked up? Not everyone can afford to carry a mobile phone, and most forget to do so by the time they get home. The acoustic alerting system needs to be active at all times that the vehicle is moving, not just where it doesn't belong. You cannot rely on the driver to know that a pedestrian doesn't hear them coming and honk his horn. It can be any kind of sound, beeping, whirring, clicking, motor sounds, etc. Just something that would alert seniors, parents with children, and the disabled, particularly with visually impaired, of what danger they are in and act in time. We also recommend an additional flashing light on the front to catch the eye of people with hearing loss. We cannot plan for every eventuality, but we should try. It was also mentioned that the city can only request an acoustic alerting system, but if it's written into the contract, it should be mandatory. Why are we rushing into this full throttle? Should we not start with a small trial of 500 e-scooters in select areas to see how the public would respond to them, allowing the city to work out any unforeseen problems before going citywide? There have been a lot of complaints about the conditions of the scooters themselves in other cities and that they are not maintained properly in excessive numbers. Calgary is reducing its number back to 1,500. There's too many issues with such a large fleet. E-scooter companies are full of wonderful promises and rosy predictions about the good e-scooters can do for reducing vehicular traffic and transit congestion, but there are no real facts to back up their claim. Studies do show that people pick up and drop off e-scooters by transit stops, but the studies themselves mention that the most common placement for them is next to transit stops anyways. The figure of reducing one car trip in 3 came from a voluntary survey in Calgary of approximately 7,000 citizens. The survey asked about potential future trips, and half of those that answered had not even ridden an e-scooter. Until there is definitive proof that offsets the damage from battery production, they can't claim to be environmentally friendly or sustainable. According to statistics, 22% of Hamilton's population is disabled. While that makes us a minority, it is a very large minority. Council promotes improvements to the city as seen through an equity, diversity, and inclusion lens. This report is not equitable or inclusive to the disabled. Knowing that we had serious reservations regarding e-scooters, why didn't the planning department consult with us before this report was finalized? There are a number of issues that have been overlooked or misunderstood that the ACPD would have been happy to only point out, but to work with you to mitigate and address our concerns. We at the ACPD strongly recommend that the committee does not go ahead with commercial e-scooters. Toronto just recommended their council that e-scooters would be too dangerous and costly to justify their use. If you do decide to go ahead with e-scooters despite our reservations, we stand ready to assist you in trying to mitigate as many safety issues as is possible before finalizing this proposal and signing contracts. To that end, we have submitted a list of recommendations for your consideration. We would like to thank this committee for their time and attention. James Kemp, Advisory Committee for Persons with Disabilities.
Wow. 1 second left. That was pretty good, James. Right to the button. Okay. Question for James. I have Councillor Jackson. Floor is yours.
Thanks, Chair Vanderbeek. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Thank you. Representative Kemp, thank you very much for your excellent presentation and the cautions that you have seriously put before this committee before possibly moving ahead on Report 10.1. Madam Chair, I'm not trying to debate Report 10.1 at this time because it's just delegations, but since Representative Kemp made a couple of assertions, could I at least reference a paragraph in the report to ask him how he would respond to it, please? Because afterwards, once he's gone, I won't get a chance to ask him.
Madam Clerk? She was ready for me to ask her that question. Sorry.
Through you, Madam Chair. This is Alicia Davenport from Clerks. Yes, that would be acceptable at this time.
Councillor?
Thank you, Elsie Davenport. So, James, on page 6 of staff's report today that we'll eventually debate, halfway down, it says that staff did receive correspondence from ACPD and from council. And it says, and here's my 2 questions to you. Specifically, the RFP will encourage operators to include specialized equipment that alerts pedestrians to the presence of an e-scooter. That's my first question. How would you respond to that, James? Through you, Chair Vanderbeek.
James?
Through you, Madam Chair, my response would be to Councillor Jackson would be the report actually states that the acoustic alerting system that they can suggest is only going to be active in areas where the scooter doesn't belong. We believe it should be on as long as the vehicle is in motion.
That's good. That's fine, James. And my second question, Madam Chair, the RFP says they will include provisions for operators to be trained on safe operation. How would you respond to that, James? Through you, Madam Chair.
James?
Through you, Madam Chair, to Councillor Jackson. I'm not entirely sure how they would be able to accomplish that other than doing PSAs or things through the internet. They can't go to person. I mean, they might have to have a small volunteer group at the beginning. go out to the streets, but they can't maintain it for a very long period of time. And we have a lot of people in the city. Same with their plan for handing out helmets. There's only so many helmets they can hand out, and are they appropriate?
So James, Madam Chair, just to wrap up my questions to James. Thank you, James. At the very worst today, would you prefer, would it be your desire on behalf of ACPD that we table or refer this matter back to have more dialogue with ACPD? Through you, Madam Chair, please.
James?
Through you, Madam Chair, to Councillor Jackson. Yes, we would quite appreciate more dialogue. We have many suggestions that could hopefully foresee some of these issues if City is still determined to go forward with this project.
Thank you, James. And listen, James, you're 22%, although a large minority. Please, along with the seniors who represent 25% of our demographic, you're a very important group and want to accommodate as much as possible. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. And I have no further speakers. Questions for you, James. So thank you, James. If you'll turn your video and your microphone off, we'll move on to the next one. And as you heard me say in the beginning, we'll be receiving these at the end of all of the presenters, James. Thank you. And so we're going to item 9.2. That's Walter Cairns respecting item 10.1, the commercial e-scooter operations. I'd like to call on Walter. And Walter, if you could unmute your microphone and turn on your video, you will have 5 minutes from the time you start speaking. The floor is yours, sir.
Yeah, good afternoon, Madam Chair and the members of the Works Committee. My name is Walter Cairns. I'm a senior, 72 years old, and I'm here to dispute the e-bike being banned on the Confederation Trail. I've been in Canada since 1973, and I've rode bikes on that trail ever since I came to Canada. My wife and I ride all the time. But as years go by, as you know, I get better at the bike, so I just kept going, and my wife couldn't keep up with me. So we had to go and buy some e-bikes. And now we bought the e-bikes, we can ride together again. And we're riding along the trail one day, and there's a sign, no e-bikes permitted. These are pedal assist bikes. They're not only powered, they're pedal assist, so we can ride together again. But now we can't enjoy the beauty of the lake because we can't ride our bikes down there. And as a
Mr. Cairns, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I'm pausing your time. Are you here to talk about the e-scooters or e-bikes?
No, this is an e-bike, a pedal assist bike.
Okay, hang on a minute. So the problem is, Mr. Cairns, you were approved for item 10.1, which is about e-scooters, sir. So well, just give me a minute. I just need to check with the clerk. It'll just be a minute, sir.
Sure, no problem.
Through you, Madam Chair, this is Alicia Davenport from Clerks. My apologies, Walter. This is a different matter, so I will leave it to you in terms of whether you wish to finish your presentation or if you wish to stop, and I can redirect you accordingly following the meeting.
Well, I can finish my presentation here. I'm sure the councillors and the chair will listen to me and take it into consideration, if that's okay.
It is. Thank you so much for your understanding.
Yeah, it's not a problem.
Okay, Mr. Cairns, so I did stop your time.
That's
so
okay.
I'm going to give you a couple seconds to get back into your presentation, and I'll start your time again. Okay, so you go ahead.
I don't need 5 minutes like the last person. This is very short. I basically want to be able to ride my pedal assist bike on Confederation Park. The majority of e-bikes that I see down there, and I ride my bike every day, the majority of e-bikes are ridden by senior citizens. There are some young guys, granted, and there are some that speed along there, granted. We are not, my group is not one of them. We ride according to the pace of the people there. If there's lots of people there, we go very slow. And if there's nobody there, we go a little faster. It's that simple. But as for banning them, it's ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. So I implore the committee and Madam Chair to please look at this rule again and change to senior citizens can be allowed to ride their pedal assist bikes at the lake. It's that simple. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Cairns. I appreciate your delegation. Are there any questions for Mr. Cairns? I don't see any at this time. Councillor Danko, floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just one question. So you mentioned that the bike that you have specifically is pedal assist. So you can turn off the electronic function, in which case you would be legal on the waterfront trail. Is that an option for you?
It could be an option. The only problem with that, through the chair, sorry, is that they're much heavier than a regular bike. So a 72-year-old pedaling a regular bike compared to the e-bike is much different.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, I don't have any other questions. And so, Mr. Cairns, you're welcome to stay, but you need to turn your video off and your mic off for me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Item 9.3 is Chris Schaefer from Bird Canada. Chris, I need to remind you that you are a vendor, and so you need to speak generally to e-scooters, not directly to your product or your service. You can go ahead, and I'll start your timer as soon as you start speaking. You have 5 minutes.
I'm going to share my screen if I can, Chair.
Surely, as long as it's not marketing material.
No, it's for my presentation. Can you see my screen?
I can see your screen.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, committee members, for the opportunity to speak to you today. My name is Chris Schaefer, and I'm Vice President of Government Affairs at Bird Canada. We are a shared commercial e-scooter company. We're a first and last kilometer micromobility sharing company. We are Canadian owned and operated. On the right-hand side is a picture of a Lock 2 e-scooter. It's what staff here are recommending for shared scooter in your city. I want to touch on right off the top, just supports the Hamilton staff report, recommendations and approach. This is consistent in terms of what staff are recommending with what's happening across Canada. There are a number of cities currently with shared e-scooter programs. Kelowna, Calgary, Edmonton, Ottawa, Windsor just launched this weekend. There are about a dozen other Canadian cities in Canada that are at various stages of regulatory development towards a potential shared e-scooter program. Those include Richmond, BC, Vernon, BC, Winnipeg, Saskatoon, and a variety of cities in Ontario, such as Mississauga, London, Waterloo Region, Hamilton potentially as well, and Halifax on the East Coast, just to name a few. There's about over 150 cities globally that have shared e-scooter programs as well, currently in operation. So Hamilton has suggested here an RFP, that is to, if you like, cap the number of operators that you would permit. It's a smart move. Other cities are doing this. Calgary, Ottawa, Windsor, and London have all RFP'd. And that way the city can control the number of vendors that you select, rather than, if you go back about 2 to 3 years ago when cities were just getting started with shared e-scooter programs, you had some cities with 12 to 15 operators, which was way too many. So it's a smart move here on city staff to propose that. It's in line with other cities as well. The number of e-scooters proposed in terms of commercial shared e-scooter operation is generally consistent with other cities. Ottawa, that should read 1,200 to 1,500. I apologize for the typo. Calgary is at 1,500. Edmonton, I'd recommend you don't go there. It's too high. You want to start conservatively in a city, build goodwill and support. And so what I can see here is generally Hamilton is proposing in line with where other cities have landed. So I think that's good as well. In terms of operating speed, they're recommending 20 kilometers an hour maximum. One of the beauties of shared scooters, you've already as a city previously, as you know, permitted personally owned e-scooters. So riders currently in Hamilton have that permission to ride personally owned e-scooters. One of the beauties, if you like, about a shared commercial program is the city has much more control. So what do I mean by that? You can go and buy a personally owned e-scooter from Amazon or a store, soup it up aftermarket to whatever speed you like. The beauty with a shared scooter program is you cap that speed. So here staff are recommending 20 kilometers an hour. That's consistent with other cities, but you're also got control to geofence a slowdown zone. So staff are recommending key areas of the city that are high pedestrian areas and paths be geofenced to 10 kilometers an hour. We can do that. That's what you can do with shared scooters. You can't do that on the personally owned e-scooter side. And we can also geofence other things such as no park zones. So you want to have parking. You can have slowdown zones. You can layer them on top of each other to have a slowdown zone and a no park zone. Or in addition, you can have no ride zones where you just don't simply permit shared scooters to be ridden at all in key areas of the city. So the next slide. Oops. Operating areas, again, consistent with what other cities are proposing in terms of being permitted on bike lanes, roads, designated pathways, and trails. This is consistent with other cities in Canada. New for Canada would be locked to e-scooters, where the scooter has to be locked to permitted municipal infrastructure after a trip. This would be the first in Canada. This keeps the public right-of-way clear because you lock it up as you would a bicycle. To a bike rack or other permitted municipal infrastructure. So good on Hamilton for proposing that. And lastly, parking management and enforcement. Again, what staff are recommending is consistent across cities in terms of the education we provide in NAP, the public training sessions we host in the city in collaboration with city staff, to the streams that we have of uniformed staff out in real time in the street responding to issues, in addition to our various modes in-app that allow consumers to respond and report issues directly to us. So that's my 5 minutes. Thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to any questions.
Thank you, Chris. If you could take down your presentation, I'll be able to see whether anyone wants to speak to you. Thank you. Councillor Farr.
Thanks, Madam Chair. And I tried hitting the little microphone in eScribe, Clerk Davenport, just so you know, it wasn't working. One quick question, just on that enforcement piece. It's something I was looking at when looking at this report, talking to staff about it. I think it's a very key component. Do you think the operators that exist now in your expertise have the ability to address illegally parked or illegal use in a timely manner? And if so, what is, in your opinion, an efficient way of addressing these issues?
Through you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor. It's a good question. So I'll keep it as short as I can. There's a number of ways we do to help manage in collaboration with city staff, the public right of way. So first here, staff are recommending scooters be locked up after each ride. We would then require the rider to take a picture at the end of the trip that verifies the scooter is in fact locked to permitted infrastructure. If it's not, we then have the ability retroactively to go to that rider and give them more education, a warning, fine them, so a financial penalty for if they were to lock it to something that wasn't permitted, in addition to removing them from the app completely for continued non-compliance. We also have what we call, and it's the same thing, each scooter company offers this, it's just called something slightly different. We call it a Safe Streets team. These are uniformed staff that are out every day in the city, talking to residents, addressing issues in real time. So if we got a report through our internal systems about a scooter that was misparked, we then respond to that. Cities have generally required anywhere between 4-hour response time, or Ottawa's, for example, is a 1-hour response time. Our average response time in Ottawa is under 20 minutes. The last thing I'll note is, again, each scooter company has similar features. We call it community mode. So if a member of the public never wants to ride an e-scooter, they can download our app or our competitor's app. And in it, they can report an issue such as a misparked scooter, or a scooter that was locked to something it's not permitted to be locked to. That bypasses 311, goes directly to us. We respond within the time limit specified in an RFP or or contract. And generally, we blow those timelines out of the water by responding quickly.
Well, thank you, Chris. I'm speaking on behalf of all potential operators, of course, but I appreciate the expertise. I like hearing about the take a picture once you parked. I'm sure most people will, but for those few that maybe do not, should we move forward? You know, I ask because it's not really clearly defined yet. We talk about within a defined period of time. So knowing it takes you 20 minutes in Ottawa on a 1 hour window before their municipality goes in and does it and then bills the operator, that's a good starting point for me. And I'll probably ask that of staff a little bit later. I appreciate it. I was going to ask, you know what, I'm not going to, because the Clerk Davenport and yourself, Chair, want to stick to the script here, and Chris is a delegate, so I'll be able to ask operator-related questions to staff. I know Peter knows a great deal about this, but I do appreciate these delegations today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Farr. Councillor Pauls.
Thank you, and thank you, Chris. And I don't know if this is a question for staff or for you, but I was wondering if someone owns their own e-scooter or just a scooter. We said we want to not have more than 500 of these scooters. Can anybody ride on them? I don't know if you could answer that. Let's say, you know, a lot of kids, I see them with these types of scooters. Some are electric and some are not. Can they go on the road? Can they use the pathway? Can they use the roads and trails and designated bike lanes?
Councillor Pauls, I'm thinking this might be a better question for the report.
Okay. That's, I just
staff.
wanted to, I don't know if,
I'm okay to answer it, but I defer to the chair.
Well, I think, well, I don't know. You can answer it, I suppose, from your experience, but I think that as far as Hamilton goes, probably it should be a staff question.
So is that, would you like me to proceed, Chair?
Sure, go ahead. Go ahead.
Through you, Chair. Thank you for the question. So the province, under their provincial regulations that permit cities like Hamilton to have a pilot for shared scooters, limit the age to 16 and above. So we can't go below that. We have systems in place, as do other shared e-scooter companies, to prevent ridership below that age. So it would be 16 plus. Hamilton could, like other cities have done, and said, you know what, the province sets a bar at 16. We're comfortable with that bar being raised to 18, and then we would follow that lead from Hamilton. It's really up to the city to provide that direction in their RFP and or rules that operators like us, if we were selected through an RFP, would have to abide by.
I will ask the staff a few other questions, because whether you're 16, 17, or 18, if you own one, we can't stop anybody from using the bike lanes, obviously. Is that my thoughts? But I'll ask staff, and maybe they could answer it as well. I know we would want them to use the e-scooters the companies are supplying, but we can't stop people from having their own or just using our bike lanes. So.
Okay, are you finished, Councillor?
Yeah, I'll ask some to staff. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Pauls. Oh, sorry. Councillor John Paul Danko. Sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Danko, go ahead.
No problem. The other Paul.
Yeah.
Through you, just a couple questions. So just picking up on some of the safety concerns that we heard earlier. So the Lock 2 scooter that's being proposed can only be locked to approved municipal infrastructure. So how is that regulated and enforced through the app?
Through you, Chair, thank you for that question. So the city would spell out what infrastructure is municipally permitted. So the rider then would have an obligation to lock to that infrastructure. So we would use a variety of means to enforce that, if you like. We would require a rider to take, in order to end their trip, they have to take a photo of where they parked. The trip is unable to be ended, so the credit card keeps ticking, if you like. So we can use that photo to analyze whether, in fact, that rider hit the mark. Did they lock to permitted infrastructure? If it was locked to, I'm making it up, a rail, or sorry, a doorknob handle on a door in front of a commercial building, that would obviously not be permitted. We could then go to that rider and do a couple of things: warn, financially penalize, and or remove. I would also, what worked well in Ottawa was local police there did a blitz for a few days, and they publicized it. And that was quite effective because what it does is, I'll use myself as an example. I'm a driver. I drive a car. Occasionally I rent a car. I did get a speeding ticket once in my life, but that ticket sends a message to me to adjust my practice. So a little bit of bylaw enforcement is always welcome as well. It just helps further educate. But we use the tools of the photo in addition to our community mode feature. Again, this is consistent across all operators. That allows the public to report issues of non-compliance through the app, and then we can respond in real time.
Thank you.
Councillor.
On the issue of training, how is training provided and how do you ensure that people are appropriately trained to operate the scooters?
Chris?
Thank you, through you, Chair. Thank you for the question again. Again, one of the, as I mentioned, I use the word beauty of a shared scooter program. You've already, as a city, permitted personally owned e-scooters, is that you have a lot more control. So what do I mean by that? Is there's, before a rider rides, and you can have this appear every time a rider rides, there's education in app. So there's videos, there's other demonstrations on how to properly ride and park an e-scooter. We do other various, again, this is consistent across all operators, whoever a city were to select, pop up and email reminder messages as well. But one of the things that we have, again, it's what other companies have as well. We call it beginner mode. So what does that mean? It's a function for new riders. Again, this is not, an e-scooter is not like a bicycle where you have to wear training wheels and get used to it. You can ride an e-scooter on your first ride, but we have a beginner mode. Other companies have similar features. What that does is softens the acceleration. So it starts slower. You can have that turned on for all new riders. You can have it turned on so that people have the ability to select that option all the time if they want that option. Again, it's about using technology and tools to make this safe and reliable for riders.
So I'm hearing that the training is mandatory in-app, and also the vehicle shaping is possible, is one of the functionalities so that new riders would be in beginner mode and then they can progress up. Follow-up question on that, the issue of helmets. How is that, the logistics of helmets handled?
Through you, Chair, great question. So under the provincial rules, helmets are required for riders under the age of 18 at law, just as they are for bicycles. For riders 18 plus, the province does not require helmets for bicycles or scooters. So given that, we always encourage helmet use. You'll see it in all of our education material, be it in-app or at those public education sessions we held in cities across Canada. Again, all e-scooter operators hold these public training sessions. For our company in particular, again, I'm not trying to be specific about my company. Other companies may have the same thing. We distribute helmets free of charge at those public events, but you can also, through our app, order at no cost to the rider beyond shipping, a free helmet to be delivered to your home address in Hamilton.
Thank you. And then just last question, some of the concerns that we heard about safety. So I assume those other cities, Ottawa, Calgary, Edmonton, Windsor, London, have similar regulations where the e-scooters can only be used on the road and on bike lanes. So in your experience in the industry, have you seen any specific statistics that speak to the safety of using the e-scooters on road or in bike lanes?
Chris?
Through you, Chair, it's a great question. So yes, we have. We've now had operations, as you know, we're now in our third season of operations in Calgary and Edmonton, Ottawa's second year. So there is some data now available. The International Transport Forum analyzed comprehensively cities globally and found the risk of riding an e-scooter is similar to the risk that you would have riding an e-bike or bicycle in a city. So there's some risk, obviously, in anything you do. Walking, driving a car is by far the riskiest in the city for pedestrian and driver. But what we're seeing is, if you look at the Calgary data, for example, they looked at injuries reported related, and this was by Alberta Health Services. So this was not our data, but in fact, Alberta Health Services data. They compared e-scooter to bicycle, motorcycle, and car accidents and injuries. E-scooters had the lowest over 2019 and 2020, the 2 years they analyzed. of injuries and or no deaths related. You had a number of deaths related to motorcycle, bicycle, and cars, none to e-scooters, thankfully, and lower rates of injuries compared to all of those various means of transportation. So the scooters are safe. One of the practices that companies deploy is the charge on a scooter generally lasts somewhere between 24 to 36 hours, just given its use. The scooter then cycles back through a local warehouse. So there would be a warehouse somewhere in Hamilton or the local area. And that goes, before it's recharged and redeployed, that scooter goes through a manual vehicle inspection by certified mechanics that are trained to deal with scooters before it's redeployed every time. So you've got very safe devices that are operating, and cities have found generally it's as risky as riding a bike.
Councillor?
Thank you. Those are all my questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I have second-time speakers. Councillor Pauls.
So I think actually you might have just answered it. I was thinking about the insurance. Would each company have their own insurance if, let's say, somebody gets injured or, gets in an accident? Would they basically go through your company?
Through your chair, it's a great question. So as you can imagine, and staff will probably have more to say, one of the conditions or requirements of any city in which we operate on, operate in. So that would be to date, Kelowna, Calgary, Edmonton, Ottawa, Windsor, all of them, and rightfully so, require insurance and indemnification. So you would see in those agreements extensive insurance documentation that any e-scooter operator, be it Bird Canada or anybody else, would have to satisfy the risk and insurance department at your city that the adequate insurance is in place. That's mandatory, and it would be no different in Hamilton.
That's great. Thank you. Good to know that. Thanks.
Absolutely.
Thank you. And I have one more second-time speaker, Councillor Farr.
Yeah, just through you to Chris, we had a near debacle. In fact, lost a motion, then got a motion back on track with our SOBI, our coveted bike share program. What had happened was we had our operator, third party, did a midnight move on us. It caused great consternation for all the users of our popular program, but also council, some divisive debates. And ultimately what we have here is a potential funding opportunity, so we don't have to get into that divisiveness in the community or around the horseshoe again. And I think that's one of the major selling points. And what we notice here, and similar to other cities, we're going out and RFPing more than two. We're going out and operating, looking for 3 operators. Do you think that that's a sufficient enough number of companies to welcome into our community as mutual operators, group operators, separate companies, to thwart any midnight move in the future?
Chris?
Through you, Chair. Thank you, councillors. It's a good question. I think Hamilton's being really strategic about this. Look, I'll use myself as an example. I live downtown Toronto. I don't own a car. I own a bicycle, and I get around with rideshare, taxi, and public transit and bike. The reason I say all of that is because myself, but also every scooter company, so it's not just Bird Canada, we all view the importance of options of micromobility. And so it's not about subtracting from somebody else or taking something from somebody else. It's about creating that ecosystem. And if we can, through the fees that we provide, if we were selected through an RFP process, help our friends in the bicycling, shared bike community remain in business. This isn't about competition. This is about building up everybody in this space, because the more people cycle, the more people scoot. The more people scoot, the more people cycle, the more people take public transit. All of this, I think, is very good for a city. So I was a fan when I saw that recommendation in the staff report. If we can help, if we were selected through that process, I think it's ideal. In terms of the number of vendors, I think looking at every city in Canada that's done this to date, plus globally, you'd want no more than 3. 2 might be a sweet spot, but no more than 3. And you want to start, again, I always recommend to cities, and I think Hamilton's taking this approach when I read the staff report, is you want to start conservatively. This is something new. The car was introduced 100 plus years ago. It was something new to the city. It was something we had to gradually get used to. This would be something new. And I think you want to start conservatively and grow from there and make sure that the support is in place to support that. I know I had the pleasure of speaking with your advisory accessibility committee in November, and I look forward to continued dialogue on this matter, even after if council was to permit a shared scooter program. That dialogue doesn't stop. So bottom line, I think staff are taking the right approach here.
I appreciate the answer. I was more specific to having 3 means if one back door does the midnight move, the other 2, as it is built into what's before us, can pick up the slack, and we're not caught without any operator like we were with Sobe. So I like 3, even 4, but I like 3, what's recommended here. Thank you again, Chris, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. I don't have any further questions for you. If you wish to stay, could you turn your video and your mic off, please? And we'll go on to item 9.4, which is Shoaib Ahmed from Scooty Mobility. So Shoaib, I'm reminding you too that you are a vendor, so you must be speaking generally, not marketing or solicitation of your product or your services. When you're ready, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hello, everybody. My name is Shoaib Ahmed. I'm the founder and CEO of Scooty. We are a Toronto-based micromobility company out of the Ryerson University's Digital Media Zone. Thank you again for allowing us to speak. We're here today to express our great appreciation to staff for the recommendation to introduce a shared e-scooter pilot. Done properly, as you know, my colleague Chris and others have said, this e-scooter pilot will greatly improve local mobility, improve access, and extend the reach of transit, and support local businesses. And we're here really today to ask the committee and the council to consider the value of working with companies that understand Hamilton's vision, especially understand how this works with the current infrastructure in the city and the culture, and how things are going to evolve in a post-COVID climate. What's interesting is, through research and civic partnerships, there are many effective ways to maximize benefits of micromobility, and while proactively addressing and mitigating concerns raised about e-scooters that members of the public and various stakeholders such as the CNIB have brought forward. And the best way to respect the rights of pedestrian riders and various stakeholders is through reducing risk by education and sensible and controlled implementation, along with what Chris just said, a conservative approach in launching electric scooters and micromobility in any city for that matter. By carefully studying the rollout of e-scooter programs and pilots in cities across the world, we have to look carefully at best practices, and found that one of the most important way of building a best practice is to build enduring relationships with community and municipal stakeholders. And we know that by working with local companies who are immersed in your communities and are with you in the long haul is the best way to get something off the ground in a proper manner. We also welcome the recommendations posed by the CNIB. There's some great recommendations over there. I think as e-scooter companies, we can do better. We need to do better, and we welcome their recommendations. And if there's an opportunity to work together, even as a working group, we'd be happy to address any concerns anybody has on micromobility, and welcome and thank the city for taking this forward. And that is all for me. Thank you so much for the opportunity to present to you.
Thank you, Mr. Ahmed. I do have a speaker, John Paul Danko. Councillor Danko.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So you heard the questions that I asked earlier, so I'll give you a chance to respond to the kind of the similar themes there about the lock 2 controls, training, helmets, just safety on road, and just the overall risk of riding a scooter versus car or bicycle.
Through the chair, thank you, Councillor, for those questions. So the lock 2 mechanism is becoming now a standard feature in electric scooters, and we can provide them. It's not very difficult to provide. But as what Chris mentioned, a lot of the usage and the new behavior of using a scooter happens through education, and there's various ways that you implement education, especially to target market of e-scooter riders, which, traditionally speaking, is between the ages of 16 to 35. In fact, our eldest rider was at the age of 76. But there is a behavior change and there is a culture change, and without education, it becomes a bit of a challenge to teach people how to use it. It goes the same goes for wearing helmets. We have to do very strong education. We have to do very strong pushes, and we have to do very strong public engagement programs for people to learn how to ride safely. And as Chris mentioned, many scooter companies do this. There are modes available on an e-scooter where there's a gradual speed increase for beginners and people that have never ridden an e-scooter. And Councillor Paul recently mentioned, people on Hart Street, kids and others are riding e-scooters. And what's really interesting from our observation, and we see this everywhere, is it becomes quite intuitive. You get on it, you just sort of know. There are certain things ingrained in us that know that you have to push, you have to pedal, and so on, or you have to press the throttle. And we don't anticipate, and not in other scooter companies, we don't anticipate that it is sustainable to dump scooters in a city and just walk away and expect app education systems to teach people. We have to be involved. We have to be engaged with our stakeholders, or else it becomes quite messy, as you have seen in other cities. And I think, Councillor Janko, I hope I answered all your questions.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I don't have any further questions for you, Shoaib. So if you could just turn off your video and your mic, we'll move on to 9.5 with Jamie Stuckless.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And Jamie is respecting item 10.1, the commercial e-scooters operation again. I'll call on Jamie. Please unmute your microphone and turn on your video, and you will have 5 minutes when you start to speak, sir. The floor is yours.
So thank you for the opportunity to speak with
Jamie,
you today.
I'm sorry, I just called you sir. That wasn't very nice. I apologize. Go ahead.
Thank you. Next time I'll remember to put my pronouns on the submission form.
My apologies.
So I'll start again if that's okay.
Yes, absolutely. I'll start your time when you start.
So thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you today about the potential introduction of commercially operated shared e-scooters in Hamilton. My name is Jamie Stuckless, and I'm a resident here in Ward 1. I also do some work in the transportation sector across North America and have a long-standing interest in this always evolving topic. I was supportive of your decision in December 2020 to allow personally owned e-scooters in Hamilton as part of the 5-year provincial e-scooter pilot, expanding the available mobility options for people in our city. However, as noted in the staff report, introducing a commercial shared e-scooter system could have negative financial impacts on our existing bike share system. Data from across North America has been inconclusive about how the introduction of commercial e-scooters might impact bike share use and user fees. This could be especially concerning since bike share here runs primarily on fundraising and user fees and does not receive operational funds from the city. To the best of my knowledge, Hamilton is the only long-standing bike share system in Ontario that does not receive operational funding from their municipality. So this is a unique consideration to Hamilton. I also think that Hamilton's 2020 experience with Uber pulling out of their bike share operating contract early should make us particularly cautious about introducing a new privately operated shared micromobility system if that system could take ridership and fees away from bike share while it's here. In addition to the potential impacts on bike share, e-scooters can also create mobility barriers, as has been highlighted by the representative from the ACPD committee. I was very glad to see staff include a mandatory lock-to requirement for e-scooters as part of the staff report. This would see locking mechanisms on each scooter to lock to a rack or other object like we do with our bike share. While this system has been implemented in Chicago and a small but growing number of cities across the US, I believe that Hamilton would be the first Canadian jurisdiction to require this, and it could go a really long way to reducing blocked sidewalks and poorly parked scooters. But I also think it's likely to increase demand for bike parking and could lead to overcrowded bike share stations and bike racks across the city. To address this, for example, Washington, D.C. has committed to deploying 1,000 extra bike racks each year over 4 years to increase available parking as part of their Lock 2 requirement for e-scooters. At present, the provision of additional parking appears to be a recommended item for operators only in this proposal. And with regards to sidewalk riding, I support the calls from other delegates to make the acoustic alerting system mandatory instead of recommended to help alert other sidewalk users to possible e-scooters riding nearby. I would also note that the most likely strategy for reducing sidewalk riding isn't stickers or education, but building more safe spaces for people to ride. I agree that sidewalk riding is dangerous and should not be allowed. However, making people choose between riding on a road with no separation from fast-moving cars and trucks or breaking the rules and riding on the sidewalk is unfair. More safe and separated infrastructure is needed in order to eliminate sidewalk riding and protect our most vulnerable road and sidewalk users. I also wanted to note that Hamilton's Everyone Rides initiative has been a distinguishing feature of our bike share system, helping hundreds of community members gain access to the bikes at discounted rates and without credit cards. While reading this report, I didn't see anything in there about operators being required to offer equity programs for e-scooter users. Lastly, I'd like to close by echoing previous comments that there has no official public engagement on this topic, even though it is likely to have impacts on a number of different roads, sidewalk, and pathway users. Before the city chooses to move forward with an RFP process, public engagement should take place. As I mentioned at the beginning, I am generally supportive of expanding micromobility options in Hamilton. Hamilton has been a micromobility leader in Canada, adopting the now common hybrid docked bike share system before other communities did, leading the way with the Everyone Rides Equity Initiative, and being the only Canadian city where bike share access is greater in lower socioeconomic areas of the city. If you choose to move forward with e-scooters, I hope that the City of Hamilton will continue that leadership and take the time to engage with community on developing rigorous standards that prioritize the needs of community and protect the most vulnerable residents. I'd like to end with 5 short questions. What provisions will the city be putting in place in case the proposed vehicle fees do not cover potential bike share fee losses? Will the city commit to rolling out more bike and scooter parking to account for the increased parking demand? Will there be an increased investment in safe places to ride to reduce sidewalk riding? What lessons will be learned from our Everyone Rides initiative, and will operators be required to offer free or discounted rides and access to people without credit cards? And lastly, why has there not been public outreach associated with the introduction of possibly thousands of e-scooters, and what consultation will take place to inform the RFP? Thank you again for your time, and I welcome any questions you might have.
Thank you, Jamie. I do have a couple of councillors who are asking for questions. Councillor Farr, you're first on the list.
I'm going to try to answer all 5, Jamie. Thanks for delegating again, and I really appreciate the input. It looks like Councillor Jackson may want to defer this item to allow for engagement, at least with the accessibility committee. But if that happens, certainly we could. I'd work with Councillor Jackson to amend to also include outreach to your committee and others. So that answers your outreach question. Your first question of the 5 was where I wanted to go with you anyway. I really appreciate it. One of the big reasons why I support this right now is because you'll recall, and I had mentioned it already to the provider, the operator of Bird. We went through quite an awful time there trying to keep Sobe alive. We are now in a 2-year bike share sustainability mode, which is great, but it's just 2 years. And my big sell here is that there's the potential with 3 operators to keep bike share sustainable. So having them around, yes, I get your competition comments, and I have actually read about that same concern in other communities. A lot of other communities shared that concern that eventually had them. But it's a sustainable operating source, and That to me, to answer your first question, is what I kind of appreciate the most. And I'm sure you see that. But my question to you on that is, are you also aware that last Wednesday, Council ratified my motion, which was thanks to the good work of the councillors and the mayor around it was born out of the mayor's task force on going forward, our parking in lieu development charges, they'll be discounted, but they will all now go towards transportation demand management funding. So there's another sustainable source. Were you aware of that? For funding things like SOBI.
Thank you for the question. And through the chair, I did hear briefly about that just yesterday, and thank you for making that move. And I'm not sure if it is for sure, written and approved that it would go towards bike share or just generally towards TDM initiatives. So I think the comment still stands that there is an operational support on the books for the operations of bike share, but I am very encouraged to hear the continued conversation that you and your colleagues are leading about how to make bike share more sustainable.
Yeah, and this may be, in my opinion, one way to do it. Bring in these operators. Having 3, I think, solves our midnight move problem. But I understand the apprehension too, and I do get your competitive comment that you opened with. So you also said, I really like your point about the equity and everyone rides. And if Councillor Jackson's motion to take some time and engage a little further, we could also consider that and then build it into the RFP. Maybe it's not as robust as I remember Councillor Green and I went asking for that everyone rides federal funding at FCM. Boy, it was back in Winnipeg years ago. And then the good work locally with Peter and you and others made it happen, helped make it happen. So I think it's been a big part of the success for SOBI, and it could be here. And I'd love for us, if we're going to take a little bit more time, to work on a way or two we may contemplate bringing that into the RFP. So thanks for that. Is that ultimately what you were looking for with that question? Building it into the RFP, Jamie?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And through the chair, first, I will make sure I can't take any credit for the great things that happened with Everyone Rides. I moved to Hamilton after that project was established, and I think it's wonderful. But you are correct. I was hoping to see something more concrete required as part of the RFP around equity initiatives and e-scooters.
We're not doing it fast enough, but on your other 2 questions, I'll just answer real quickly, Madam Chair. We are building safer infrastructure. Katy Trail was just opened, as a matter of fact. We're just finishing the missing link on Hunter. We recognize the need. We definitely could be moving faster. I feel spoiled sometimes in the core with Cannon and Bay and other protected infrastructures, Hunter, Charlton, Herkimer. But it's definitely, I think, on our radar, and it's something we are invested in. And I do believe we could use the parking in lieu money that Council did ratify. It's passed for TDM purposes, as you say, that should include bike share and SOBI sustainability to get those 1,000 bike racks or however many you feel we need if this is a success and SOBI continues to be a success. So I answered more questions than I asked, but I tried to keep it brief, Madam Chair. I appreciate the latitude and definitely the input. If we table this for a bit, I'll add some of your good points, Jamie. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Jackson, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Jamie, thanks for the excellent presentation. A very powerful one, and you have a wonderful delivery style, I want to add. So, Jamie, just to summarize what you and Councillor Farr did in your exchange of Q&As, just to summarize, would you be satisfied and feel that the appropriate direction at this time, similar to ACPD, is to refer this back and provide an opportunity for just greater consultation, not exclusively to your committee, ACPD, but the general public as well? Through you, Madam Chair, please.
Okay, Jamie.
Through the chair, yes, I would support what you have outlined about increased engagement with the ACPD committee and the broader public at large.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And those are all the speakers I have on the list, Jamie. So if you wouldn't mind to turn off your microphone and your video, then I'll move on to item 9.6, which is Larissa Proctor from CNIB Foundation, and that too is respecting item 10.1. So I'll call on Larissa. If you could unmute your microphone and turn on your video, I'll start the clock. You have 5 minutes. I'll start the clock when you start speaking.
Thank you, Chair and committee members, for the opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Larissa Proctor, and I work with the CNIB Foundation as lead for advocacy and community engagement in the Ontario West region. I'm also blind, and I travel with a guide dog. I'm here today to express both my personal and professional concerns about the impact that e-scooters will have on my safety and the safety of the approximately 29,342 Hamilton residents who are living with sight loss. In my role with CNIB, I've been following commercial e-scooter pilot projects throughout the country. As you may be aware, Montreal canceled their e-scooter pilot project due to the extensive problems that it posed for the city. In addition, Toronto's Infrastructure and Environment Committee has voted to uphold the ban on e-scooters in the city. In October 2020, as the first commercial e-scooter pilot project concluded in the city of Ottawa, the CNIB Foundation hosted a focus group of people with sight loss in conjunction with the Canadian Council of the Blind and the Alliance for Equality of Blind Canadians. The feedback that we received about the safety hazards of e-scooters was alarming. Among the primary concerns were unsafe riding, sidewalk riding, devices being discarded in the middle of sidewalks, devices blocking assistive pedestrian signals, and improper parking. It's important to note that e-scooters were not permitted on sidewalks in the Ottawa pilot, yet sidewalk riding was a regular occurrence. In March of this year, the CNIB Foundation and the AODA Alliance hosted a focus group of Toronto residents. Again, the stories that we heard were alarming. We heard from pedestrians who had encountered e-scooters traveling at high rates of speed on sidewalks, despite the ban on sidewalk riding. We also heard from blind pedestrians who had been struck by an oncoming e-scooter with no audible warning that an e-scooter was approaching. These people reported physical and mental health injuries, as well as loss of work and wages. As someone who is blind, I cannot see and safely navigate around an e-scooter that has been abandoned, improperly parked, or is impeding access to a crosswalk, assisted pedestrian signal, or accessibility ramp. While I appreciate the city's recommendation of locking mechanisms, we know from other jurisdictions that riders lock devices to railings and poles that block paths of travel and access to essential accessibility features in the environment, like ramps and assistive pedestrian signals. And it's not just abandoned or improperly parked e-scooters that will impact people with sight loss. E-scooters that are operating in an unsafe manner or traveling in an area where they're not permitted, like on a sidewalk, pose a significant risk. The city's recommendation to encourage e-scooter operators to use an automatic acoustic alerting system is not sufficient. An encouragement will not keep Hamilton residents safe. Accessibility is not optional. On behalf of the CNIB Foundation, I respectfully ask that you take the recommendation of the Accessibility Advisory Committee and ban e-scooters in all areas of the city. You have the ability to avoid the alarming safety risks that we've seen in other cities and protect your most vulnerable residents, and I strongly encourage you to do so. Should the committee choose to move forward with a commercial e-scooter project, against this recommendation, the CNIB Foundation has a number of recommendations aimed at protecting the safety of residents who are blind or partially sighted. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Larissa. On my speakers list, Councillor Jackson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Larissa Proctor, thank you so much for your presentation on behalf of an important group of individuals and citizens in our community. Thank you for your advocacy too, given your disability that you shared with us. So at the very least, I'll ask you the same question along with ACPD and along with Jamie Stuckless. Would you at least want this matter deferred back for a greater opportunity for consultation with relevant organizations such as yours? Through you, Madam Chair, please.
Larissa?
Through the chair, yes, we would love the opportunity for greater consultation with the disability community.
Thank you, Councillor.
And Larissa, could you just quickly educate me on what happened in Montreal? Because so far, the 2 or 3 company owners, operators that we've heard from today have painted a fairly rosy picture of where it's been successful in Canada and in a couple of cities in the US. But you piqued my curiosity when you talked about Montreal and Toronto, but specifically Montreal. Could you just give me a little cursory summary as to why Montreal did not go ahead or decided to abandon their project? Through you, Madam Chair.
Larissa?
Through the chair, the project was largely abandoned due to issues with improperly parked and abandoned devices and concerns around that and pedestrian safety.
Councillor?
Okay. I will do my best to see if I can educate myself some more, Larissa, but thank you very much, and very important, the words you brought to the table. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Farr.
I think Councillor Jackson has got an answer for what I was looking at. I was just going to ask, well, if we do proceed to table to have greater engagement, it's there then that you will bring your quote, I have a number of recommendations, unquote, so you'll be able to engage on those recommendations on behalf of the CNIB then?
Thank you, Larissa.
Larissa?
Through the chair, yes, we'd be happy to consult and discuss our recommendations in more detail.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for your delegation today.
Thank you. And thank you, Larissa. If you would mute your microphone again, I'd appreciate it. And that is the end of the delegations for today. So may I have a mover and seconder to receive all of the delegations? Councillor Pearson, Councillor Pauls. And the vote will be on the screen as it is. And that carries unanimously. Thank you to all the delegates. We appreciate your time and your effort to come forward and have your say and give us an opportunity to ask you questions. So we're moving on to number 10 on the agenda item. And the next item is 10.1, which is the commercial e-scooter operation agenda. And may I please have a mover and a seconder? Or Councillor Jackson, did you want to come forward with your motion, or do I need I guess I need a mover and a seconder. Okay, I need a mover and a seconder to put it on the floor to begin with. Councillor Farr and Councillor Pearson. And I have Councillor Farr has asked to be a speaker, and behind him, Councillor Jackson. Councillor Farr.
Okay, I know where Councillor Jackson's going, and he was trying to get attention, but my questions will hopefully help add a little bit of a zest and volume to a referral if the committee decides to follow up on a referral. So I just need these answered in order to have to have the inclusion happen. So through you to, I guess, Peter. If not Peter, I'm assuming Brian. I'm not sure. Oh, hi, Peter. Through you to Peter.
Peter?
Can we, if we go away and engage further, and you and I talked not long ago about that being there being a potential for that, can we, or have you already looked at an everyone rides percentage or approach to e-scooters?
Peter?
Through you to Madam Chair, yes, we could have a requirement either for the e-scooter operators to have equity provisions within their operations, or we could require them to use the Everyone Rides initiative to do so. So it would depend on both the operators of the current ERI initiative, or also to make equity a part of the regular operations of the e-scooter program. So there are a few options there in terms of how would we approach equity.
Thank you, Councillor.
And if we do have that opportunity to engage further, if Councillor Jackson's motion passes, then you'll be able to engage with all the right folks to really hone in on how that might look like then for e-scooters, and it may be a lot like Sobeys, if not exactly. So thank you. That's good to know that it's got the potential to be built into an RFP. Do you think do you go for that argument about the will probably require more parking? 500 times 3 is 1,500. As much as that's being billed as starting off slow, if they reach their potential, those three operators, and get to their max 500, notwithstanding they can apply for more if they want to apply to expand the footprint. Are you seeing a need for further bike rack enhancements like Washington?
Peter?
Through you, Madam Chair. Well, we believe we have a sufficient supply of racks and poles at this given time. We actually do have inventory of racks right now that are ready to be deployed in various wards, and we also have funding for additional racks. So we have anticipated adding the racks either way, even though we may have the right supply. I think it's prudent to have. We've always had a plan to improve our the number of racks in various wards, and we're currently doing that. So we will have more capacity either way once launch happens of these e-scooter programs. We're also expanding our SOBI stations as well. So we have expansion plans for both types.
Okay, you're keeping an eye on it. You'd probably hear about that in enhanced engagement, Peter, anyway, by the folks, some of them delegating today. Through you, Chair, staff would be responding in the enforcement mechanism that's before us on the floor now in the 8-pager 13-page recommendation. You allude to, but don't actually give a response time on enforcement if the company that owns the e-scooter doesn't act in a timely, efficient manner. I think you said in a time period that'll be further defined. So that's not defined yet, and what prevents us from making it an hour as opposed to 3 hours or 4 hours that other communities have?
Peter?
To get it out of the way of obstructing a sidewalk or in a place where it shouldn't be. Through you.
Peter?
Through you, Madam Chair. There's nothing stopping us from any kind of requirement that we wish. We are going to use best practices, and actually we have interviewed a few of the cities to understand their timelines, and like we heard today, generally they seem to be handled before that 1 hour, as Ottawa's using. And others are using 2 or 4 hours. So we have a time period between 1 and 4 hours. That's best practice. And we could use any of those time periods to in the RFP as part of our contract.
Well, the one operator was boasting they could get to anywhere in Ottawa. Well, they got to a lot of places in about 20 minutes. I like capping it at an hour, but I'll leave it to you to have further discussions on. Just on the acoustic vehicle alert system, we don't have an obligation in what's before us to have that always active while the bike is active. What prevents us from sort of making sure whenever the things are moving, they're making a sound? I know we can't put a hockey card into spokes here, but if the technology exists, then is that another enhancement we might want to contemplate engaging on?
Peter?
Through you, Madam Chair, we have not seen that implemented in an e-scooter program, at least in Canada. What we can do as part of the RFP, and I think what's prudent is to put the onus on the applicant to provide us with a plan as to how they're going to alert people in various areas, sidewalks and otherwise, and have that plan and evaluate them based on that plan. And I think that was our intent. So it could be everywhere and always, depending on what technologies they're using. And there are multiple technologies here, so we don't want to be technology specific. We want them to provide us with their plan for how they're going to meet this requirement.
Oh, so these RFPs would come back and they may already enhance what's before us and what we're asking for. I see. Well, I think that the engagement's going to help, Madam Chair. Further engagement. Certainly, Peter did a very good job reacting to correspondence from people like the CNIB and others with this report. I'm sure he's one of the best community meeting hosts I've ever seen, so I'm sure he won't have a problem other than his current workload, but no great hurry if we want to get this right and make hopefully more people feel comfortable. I think he heard what we heard from groups that maybe are positioned right now as against, but certainly they have no shortage of ideas, and they have already shared with Tom and others a willingness to engage further if we go that route. So I think we're in a good spot. I want to thank Peter for this report. It is a tricky one. Anything new is, but I really like, Madam Chair, the big piece here, sustainable funding for other transportation demand management, micro-mobility stuff that is in existence now or may come along that we don't need to get in another debate on how to fund it. This is a great way to fund a micro-mobility that we're all, as a council, mandated and seeking in this city. So thanks very much. Appreciate the answers. I'll second Councillor Jackson's motion if he likes. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Councillor Jackson, and then Councillor Danko.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Manager Topolovic, I didn't want to, I wasn't sure if 10.1 was going to be an actual presentation. I know you did a presentation to launch this several months ago, and this is the report back. But I just thought it would be fair to you and staff to at least maybe give us a summary as to what brought you to these recommendations here, Madam Chair. I'm not trying to waste committee's time because I am planning to move deferral. But I also just thought, in fairness to staff and all the work they've put in, maybe they could just give some highlights as to what brought them to the recommendations today, in spite of what they've heard from several groups in our city that are very concerned, especially from a safety standpoint, what's going to happen to their members with disabilities and challenges. Through you, Madam Chair, to Peter, maybe for Peter, I know you probably could take an hour, but maybe just give a cursory summary of what brought you to these recommendations today, please.
Peter?
Yes, through you, Madam Chair. I'll try it to be less than an hour for sure. Yeah, so I'll just start by saying in November, staff presented to council with a phased procurement process that involved continuing the bike share program and piloting other forms of micromobility. And this report concerns that next phase of the procurement, which is establishing a commercial e-scooter operations. I think we all know that, but that's sort of our thought process. And in December, staff took a report to council opting into the 5-year e-scooter provincial pilot. But of course, commercial operations were paused to allow staff to do further research and for the opportunity for stakeholders to weigh in. I think we had some of that happen. And we also did a lot of research. So we're not really operating in a vacuum here. We have all the data from the main cities that are currently operating, especially Calgary and Ottawa, but also our American comparator cities as well that we chose. This report seeks council direction and authority to establish a request for proposals process, which I think that became very clear, and to contract with up to 3 commercial e-scooter operators to operate their e-scooter service in the city. In terms of how that process will work, potential operators will submit applications through the RFP process and will be evaluated based on their applications. So I think that's another point of clarity. All the things that we've heard today, a lot of them are part of the RFP process that we're considering already, as the report alludes to, including these ideas of ensuring safety and proper parking provisions. And all that's been outlined in the report. And so the applicants will provide us with their plans, and we'll evaluate to see whether they can operate based on their plans. The operators who are awarded contracts through the process will be charged fees for administration, security deposit, and to offset bike share operations. This won't likely make money for bike share, but it will offset the impact that adding more devices in the city. That's the plan. And of course, like I think Jamie Stuckless alluded to, we are not sure about what that impact will be, and we'll have to do monitoring over the pilot period of 2 years to make sure that we're not impacting either the bike share program or the Everyone Rides initiative. The RFP will take into account these best practices. A lot of them were alluded to today across the speakers. And I think one of the big ones, of course, that we heard was to ensure that the pedestrian clearway on sidewalks is protected, and will require operators to have their e-scooters lock up to bike racks and to poles. So we'll be the first to do this in Canada. We believe we have the amount of bike racks and poles that we need, but we are actually adding a variety of different bike rack types. Both are standard, what we call our hammer hoop, those black ones that are stylized, and also more expansion to our SOBI stations. To ensure that pathways are enforced. Oh, was that good?
Nope, just maybe wrap up with that comment, please, okay, Peter, because I have 2 or 3 more questions if my time's still allotted, Madam Chair. Please, Peter.
So sorry. Yeah, we're going to ensure pathways are enforced as well, like you heard already today. And we're going to make sure that pedestrians are alerted. And we're going to be asking the operators for a plan on how they're going to make sure pedestrians are alerted to their e-scooters. And I think I'll leave it at that. Sorry, it wasn't an hour, but it wasn't maybe 3 minutes. Thank you.
No, I really appreciate it, Manager. Madam Chair, do I still on my own speaker's time have some time, please?
Absolutely, sir.
Okay, thank you. Peter, a couple of quick questions. I referenced page 6 in that middle paragraph to ACPD Representative Kemp. And he expressed back some grave concerns that you're going to try to encourage operators to include specialized equipment to alert pedestrians to the presence. And you'll also put some provisions for operators to be trained on safe operation. It sounded like Member Kemp was, if you will, maybe doubtful and still had some grave concerns on those 2 points. How would you respond, please?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. The first piece was that there are multiple technologies and multiple ways that you can do it. And it wasn't that we weren't requiring them, but we need them to write a plan and we need to evaluate that plan. So rather than say you need to use X technology, we're asking them to say, we need this to be done. How are you going to do that? And if they can't, that will be part of their evaluation. If they couldn't provide that type of signaling plan, then they would lose many points, or that would not they would not have their RFP awarded. So the problem is that there is not one technology there, and there are different ways of doing so. In the second piece, I believe that was I missed the second piece. I'm so sorry.
Training the operators.
Oh, right. So, and when we say training, we mean the people who are operating the equipment themselves, which is the what we call the riders also. And those riders would be done in-app. So I think that, again, there are multiple ways to do this. There's in-app education, and there's email-based education and videos to watch, but there's also people who can be actually deployed to in the community. And we would like to see a plan for all of those types. And of course, in the RFP, that will be something that will be evaluating the operator, the potential operators on. So again, that's why it's not that we're trying to be vague, but also we're giving the opportunity to use a variety of different methods to do this, as opposed to us saying what you're going to do. We want you to tell us what you're going to do, and we're going to evaluate on that.
And Manager Topolovic, Madam Chair, my last question. At the top of page 13 of your report, Peter, just to clarify here, because throughout the report I've read no impact to the levy, no impact to taxpayers if this is done properly. And yet here in the first paragraph on page 13, you write, when e-scooter programs are introduced in cities with stable, municipally funded and supported bike share programs, they usually impact the initial impact to the bike share ridership and generally stabilize over time. What did you mean by municipally funded? That threw me for a loop based on what I read in the rest of the report, which said, councillors, don't worry, this won't have any impact at all. Through you, Madam Chair.
Peter?
Through you, Madam Chair, we were specifically referring to the cities that we looked at whose bike share programs are municipally funded or supported. So ones like especially Washington, D.C. The point there is that those are relatively stable bike share programs that were able to, they still took an impact initially from what we understand on their ridership, but then later that sort of stabilized after the initial high interest or the novelty wore off of the actual e-scooters, and both are able to operate in the same space. The difference here, of course, is our bike share system does not receive any municipal contributions, and therefore that's why we introduced the offset fee, where some of the collected e-scooter fees will be used to offset impacts to bike share operations. That was a difference in our case.
Okay, thank you, Manager Topolovic. And Madam Chair, again, I just on behalf of the community and the our residents with disabilities, I just think this definitely requires more time, with no disrespect to our staff who have brought this report forward. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you, sir. And am I coming back to you for a motion? Councillor Jackson?
Oh, yes, please, when your speakers list is exhausted, please.
Thank you. That's what I'll do. All right. I have Councillor Danko.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to Manager Topolovic. So just so I'm clear, we've allowed personal e-scooters. They've been in use and legal in the city of Hamilton since December, so for about 5 months now. Have we noticed any change or statistics of injury or people tripping over them on sidewalks, that kind of thing?
Peter?
Through you, Madam Chair, I'm not aware of that, but I maybe defer to another staff person who might have had experience with that. But we haven't heard anything of any major consequence.
I know in the Ward 8 office, we haven't received a single complaint or issue about it, so it seems to be a complete non-issue. Just the RFP that's before us today, the proposal, what would the timeline be if this was accepted today to have e-scooters on the streets in Hamilton commercially?
Peter?
Through you, Madam Chair. There is going to be quite a time lag at this point in order to both release that RFP, so it has to still be prepared. It has to be released. There's required time for us to accept applications, and then there's time to actually, of course, evaluate those applications, because not every application will potentially make it through. So there are many months to go at this point, I would say. Although maybe it depends a little bit on myself and how fast I can be, but also it depends on a whole variety of other staff who support this process and who have their own priorities as well. So we have to get into that stream, and I would expect it to be a few months from now at the very least. I wouldn't want to put a date on it because it doesn't just rely on maybe myself, but also other staff. But as we know, these things can take multiple months to complete, if not longer.
Thank you. And then for the actual companies to mobilize in Hamilton, how long would that take, and what's required for that? I assume they have to get facilities, import whatever equipment they need, hire staff, that kind of thing, in order for them to actually fit up to get e-scooters on the road once they've been awarded an RFP. What kind of timeline are they looking at?
Peter?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Madam Chair, sorry. This varies, I think, from company to company, and some companies are more mobilized than others. It depends on which companies we actually award to and where their base of operations are. Some can mobilize faster than others. So, in fact, probably likely mobilize faster than the RFP will take.
Okay, thank you. And sorry?
Sorry, just to add, we could expect, though, there would be some delay from award of the RFP, the signing of a contract, and then the actual, bringing these on the ground. Even if they don't have if they have a temporary base of operations, it will still take, I'm assuming, some time. But like I said, I don't think that will be the time barrier. I think it's mostly the RFP process itself, which we can understand takes some time, and I would like to be able to do that properly and take the time to do so.
Councillor Danko?
Thank you. And I heard the discussion around using the revenues from e-scooters to subsidize bike share, which I think is a very good news component of this. And then just the final question on consultation and evaluation of what this might actually look like. So my understanding is we've already done quite significant consultation and research in comparator municipalities and such to come up with the RFP or the proposal for the RFP that's before us. So what's already been done through your department?
Peter?
Through you, Madam Chair. I think that what we have done is to accept a lot of the correspondence from the committees as we outlined in the report, and had some initial discussions. But we haven't done a full-fledged public engagement process. We also, this is a second part of the first report that went in November, then December, then now. So we have had consultation as we've gone along in the process. And the other thing that we have, which other cities don't, is experience operating our bike share program, which is also essentially a lock-to bike program. Again, most of whether it's an e-scooter, we have at least some experience with any type of device that locks to something. And so we do have that additional experience that other cities don't have. And of course, the other thing is we're a little bit farther down the line in terms of cities like Calgary and Ottawa who have already done this, and we have their experience as well. But there was not a formal sort of public engagement process more fulsomely that has been conducted.
Thank you. So, Madam Chair, just a couple comments. I'm really happy with what staff have before us today. I think it would be great coming out of COVID this summer to already have this in place, or at least at the very least underway for the summer season. I think a lot of the safety concerns that we've heard today have been addressed by staff and through the RFP process. And I think, to be honest, there's a little bit of perhaps a misconception of what e-scooters are and the safety aspects and how they're operated. But if members of committee need a little bit more, assurance with that and some additional consultation, I'd rather see that go forward than to risk not moving forward with this, but because I think it is a very important initiative for our city, and I think to see those positive experiences in other municipalities, I don't think we want to be left behind. So I'll leave it at that. And if we are going to go to a referral back, I'd just like to make sure that we have a timeline for that, so that it's not left open-ended. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Pauls.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And nice seeing you, Peter. It's always nice to see you and talk to you about this. But I want to ask you, for the winter months, what is the percentage? I was wondering, is it more dangerous to ride a scooter in the winter months or a bike? Because those wheels, that they caught some ice, or what's your opinion? And what do you think the intake would be for people riding in the winter?
Peter?
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. That's a good question, and that's in part, as part of the RFP, we were actually going to put that back to the applicants to say, what is your experience operating in winter? Do you have some? And if so, what are your safety provisions additionally for the scooters, because the wheels are smaller and are different than a bicycle? And what extra safety provisions would you have if you choose to operate in winter? So I don't have a good answer on that, particularly because there's not that much experience, but I think we should put it back to the operators and put the onus on them to provide that extra safety in winter if they're going to choose to operate in the winter.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you. I should have asked them when they were delegating. But the second question was, I know we say it's any age up to 75, 80-year-olds, they've ridden. I was wondering, what, in your opinion, is the actual average age the most people would ride it? Do you think it's between 18 and 25, 30 maybe? Or you think it's expands more?
Peter?
Through you, Madam Chair, just to clarify, that's for the e-scooters particularly.
Right, the e-scooters, yes, just the e-scooters.
So through you, Madam Chair, again, we have the data we have, of course, that skews somewhat younger. We do think that some older adults are taking this as a form of transportation too, but it does skew younger than a bicycle. And the numbers are varying across cities, so it was hard for me I researched this topic and it was hard for me to pinpoint a number, but it does skew younger. What's another interesting point about it is that it skews to people who don't necessarily ride a bicycle and are potentially car drivers. And one of the important parts of micromobility in general, both bike share, e-bike share, and e-scooter share, is to attract people who may not see this as a viable option and see that as one to get to their transit stop and then connect to transit, and ones to make trips that would be otherwise taken by automobile. But I would say that this would skew a little bit younger in terms of, because you do need to have a certain amount of balance, and it may appeal to a slightly younger crowd, but it definitely is being used. When we're thinking younger here, I don't think I'm thinking younger as in 20. We still see a very similar trend. That 30 something as our, especially 30 something males as people who are more likely to ride a bicycle in general. That still skews to the e-scooters as well. But there's a wide demographic of both women and younger and older persons still using e-scooters, but just slightly different than I would say on a bicycle, because a bicycle also provides an additional amount of balance and also utility in terms of using a basket, etc. So I think we'd see that as obviously the bicycle has a bit more of a broader appeal, and as part of Everyone Rides and also adaptive bike share, we don't want to just be providing something to the most people with the most balance and able-bodied. We want to see bikes, e-bikes, and also three-wheeled, whether three-wheeled, they'd be three-wheeled scooters or three-wheeled bicycles. These are other options for people who may have less balance and more needs in terms of using something that's a bit more robust in terms of getting around the city. So, we have an approach to micromobility that includes a whole variety of different vehicles. Today, we're just coming to you with these scooters, but I would hope and we also plan to be introducing other things like e-bicycles and also trikes and other devices.
I don't know, Peter, if you've seen it, but I have. Somebody sent me a video. In Holland, they have you could ride your bike. You don't have to ride it yourself. It's Googled, and it rides it for you. You just sit there, and it takes it wherever you go. You could do your homework while riding a bike. Do you believe it? It was an incredible video, and technology is amazing, you know. And you could actually call the bike with your phone, and it comes right to you. I should send you that video. It was amazing. So there's so much new stuff coming out constantly. So thank you, Peter, for the answers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And that's the end of the speakers list. And so I'm going to go back to Councillor Jackson. He's a second-time speaker for his motion.
Thanks, Madam Chair. And I'm going to look to Peter after I put the motion, because one of my colleagues on committee said they want to have it some date specific, but I've left it open-ended because I wanted to be respectful of staff. We're still in a pandemic, and I've heard Manager Topolovic say that, you know, he'd have to marshal together other staff, and I don't want the community, especially those that are going to be engaged, to feel restricted or rushed in terms of public consultation and engagement. So I'll put my motion to start, Madam Chair. Moved by myself, seconded by Ward 2 Councillor Jason Farr, that this report before us, PED 20134 bracket A, respecting commercial e-scooter operations, be deferred to provide for additional public consultation with, but not be limited to, ACPD, the CNIB, and other relevant organizations, and report back at a future Public Works Committee meeting. And again, I'll leave that to, well, why don't I ask Peter now, Madam Chair, through you to Manager Topolovic. Peter, I left that wide open again, trying to be respectful of your time, the pandemic, and the workload for the better part of this year. But if you'd like me to, if you will, give you some incentive to come back at a certain point in time this year, I could amend the motion accordingly. Through you, Madam Chair, please.
Peter?
Through you, Madam Chair, I think we can leave it open-ended. I think that there's going to be incentive to do this quickly and set a timeline ourselves as well. But I could go back and determine what that timeline would best be based on the groups that you've mentioned, and making sure we get to them all. So
for today, leave it open-ended then for a future Public Works meeting?
Through Madam Chair, yes, I think that makes sense.
Okay, thank you, Manager Topolovic. Anyways, Madam Chair, I'll stand by my motion. I heard from one or two colleagues that they would prefer to move ahead today. Last week, we spoke about, several of my colleagues referenced the Seniors Advisory Committee, how important their words were in terms of the snow removal resolution that majority ultimately supported. We've got a very important, salient, accessible committee for persons with disabilities that I heard their representative today express strong reservations and wanting a greater opportunity to be consulted, as well as the CNIB. And curiously, Montreal and Toronto don't sound as wonderful as some of the other cities that were referenced today. Anyways, I'll stand by my motion, Madam Chair. I hope it passes. If it doesn't, it will unfortunately force me to vote against 10.1 later. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Jackson. I just would like to check with the clerk, because I believe I heard last week that a deferral needs a date. So I'm just going to check just to be sure that we're doing the right thing. Madam Clerk?
Through you, Madam Chair. This is Alicia Davenport from Clerks, just confirming that it is fine to leave the motion open-ended as stated by Councillor Jackson.
Great. Thank you, Madam Clerk. All right. So it's moved by Councillor Jackson and seconded by Councillor Farr to defer this report for public engagement. And I don't see any speakers on the list, so we'll just go to a vote. It's an electronic vote. Oh, do you have somebody? Councillor Farr.
Yeah, I just want to say I'm happy to second. I appreciate where the good councillor's going with this deferral. Clearly, we have a mission to keep these things off sidewalks and you know, maybe make sure we can hear them at all times and don't take up all of our bike racks. There's lots of stuff that Peter heard today. Most of it he is aware of, and a lot of it obviously, as he answered when he had his opportunity as our staff on this file to already address that through the RFP process. So I kind of like where we are. I appreciate it. I heard those strong reservations too, but I heard from each and every delegate with strong reservations. They also said, you know, give us some time, listen to us. We have some ideas. I'm hopeful that we could find some compromise and put a lot of their great ideas to work to give them some peace of mind. There's no reason why we can't do it better than other communities, but this is successful. There's 150 different communities across North America. There's Ottawa with 40 complaints, but 116,000 riders and rides, and 40,000 of them from different riders. So you know, we're learning from those communities, and I think we could in time, with the right amount of engagement behind us, come back to this committee with something that's hopefully palatable for all parties concerned. So thank you, and I appreciate the opportunity to second this, because this is something that I think we need to engage a little more on. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Farr. Councillor Danko.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just a couple of the other, I know Councillor Jackson left it open for various advisory committees, but I think just a couple of the other relevant ones might be the Cycling Advisory Committee, the Seniors Advisory Committee, I think the seniors have two kind of stakeholder parts in this, one being the safety aspect, the other being a sleeper user group, as we heard from the cycle riders this morning. And also the environmental groups in the city and the city's climate change office, or I'm not sure what we're calling it, but because there's obviously a environmental component to this as well. So I don't know if that needs to be incorporated into the motion or just understood that you're going to go out to, you know, wider than just specifically what's in the motion. I think the motion's open-ended enough to allow for that.
Madam Chair, since he referenced me, could I respond, please?
Certainly.
Madam Chair, through you to Councillor Danko. Councillor Danko, if you're not comfortable with the wording of "and other relevant organizations," we'll capture the ones you've said. I'm more than happy to specifically include SAC and a couple of the others you mentioned as well, Cycling Hamilton, if you want. Or again, I left that other relevant organizations, hopefully would capture that, but I'm easy either way. Thank you.
Councillor Danko.
Thank you. Yeah, if we don't mind just capturing it in the specific motion, that'd be great. And I think leaving it open with "and other organizations," make sure that we leave it up to staff's discretion as well. If there's any other specific groups that we want to make sure that we speak with. And then just the last thing on the referral motion, we had a little bit of discussion on equity programs, and Manager Topolovic talked about coming back with some recommendations or best practices for equity programs. I'm not sure if that needs is a different motion or is something that staff can just take as direction, that when they do come back, they'll include some information on that.
Peter, are you still there?
Through you, Madam Chair, we could provide that update as well as part of the RFP process.
Great, thank you. Those are all my questions. Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. I don't have anyone else on the speakers list, so I think we'll go to a vote. It's an electronic vote, and should be on your screen anytime. And so this is on the deferral motion for 10.1, the commercial e-scooters. And that carries unanimously. Thank you. We'll move on to item number 10.2, which is the Pier 25 dredging memorandum of understanding between the City of Hamilton and the Hamilton-Oshawa Port Authority. May I please have a mover and seconder to put this item on the floor? Moved by Councillor Pearson, seconded by Councillor Nan. Thank you. And do we have any discussion respecting this item? I see none, so we'll go directly to an electronic vote, and it's on the screen. And that carries unanimously. Thank you. Point 3, award of request for proposal, the management and processing of the City Hamilton's green cart material. There is a confidential report listed as item 4.2 on the agenda pertaining to this matter. And that being said, if you, what I've got here is that being said, may I have a mover and a seconder to defer consideration of item 10.3 until after the closed session? Moved by Councillor, oh my goodness, moved by Councillor Jackson, sorry, Councillor Jackson, and seconded by Councillor Ferguson. And that is to defer item 10.3 until after we have the closed session discussion through the agenda. And the vote is on the screen. And that carries unanimously. And we'll go to motions. So the first one is item 11.1, William Connell Park fencing improvements in Ward 8. Councillor Danko, please introduce your motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just going to read this into the record. Whereas William Connell Park at 1086 West 5th is an active community park in Ward 8. Whereas windblown litter has become an issue at the park. And whereas the installation of a 6-foot galvanized steel chain link fence along the park's southern property line adjacent to 1136 West 5th Street would mitigate the issue by trapping litter, that therefore be it resolved that $13,000 be allocated from the Ward 8 Capital Reinvestment Directory account to implement the installation of a new chain link fence along the southern property line adjacent to 1136 West 5th Street, and that all the that the mayor and city clerk be authorized and directed to execute all required agreements. And just Councillor Pauls, wouldn't mind seconding this? Thank you, Councillor Pauls. So this is specifically adjacent to Parkview Church, which is provides a really amazing resource for residents throughout the city, delivering food to people in need. And one of the really kind of amazing things with how they operate is they allow people just to come in and kind of, they don't have to stand in line. They don't have to, fill out paperwork or anything. They can just go and pick up what they need at the church. But what that does do is it can, from time to time on a windy day, or if just there's like litter boxes and packaging on the ground, it kind of from time to time gets blown into the park. So what we're aiming to do here is just provide a fence along the property line that will kind of separate some of that windblown trash from actually getting into the park, and it'll make the pickup and cleanup of the site a lot easier. So the motion's before you, and I appreciate your support. Thank you.
Okay, I do have some. Councillor Pauls, you wanted to speak to this motion?
I just want to thank Councillor Danko because I've introduced him to the minister and few of the people that go to that church. And he was, when he got the call, he actually went to see the place. And they called me right away and said, what a wonderful counselor he was. And I agreed. So thank you, Councillor Danko, for listening and for helping that church out. They do so much for the community. It's unbelievable. I had a couple of calls for people asking for some things, and I refer them there, and they cannot believe it. It's an amazing church, Parkview Church, and the park is right beside it. So, Councillor Danko, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. And I don't see any other councillors on the list, so the vote is on the screen. And that passes unanimously. Item number 11.2 is the installation of curb extensions on McNabb Street North and Barton Street West in Hamilton, Ward 2. Councillor Farr, please introduce your motion.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Moved by myself and seconded by Councilor Marula. Whereas a concept that creates additional on-street parking for McNabb North at York to serve short-term parking needs for the farmers market has been identified, but requires a curb extension to maintain access for the nearby HSR bus pad. And then the other item on this two-parter today, residents have long requested the installation of a curb extension and rain garden at Barton Street West and McNabb North as a traffic calming measure. Last PWU were kind enough to support me on other McNabb traffic calming measures. This brings it to a conclusion. And so therefore, I'm looking for $37K for the McNabb Street project at York and an upset of $55K on the rain garden, keeping in mind, the only thing I'll speak to here is rain gardens are a heck of a lot less to our ongoing operating budget as current horticultural gardens are. So I'm making it my mission to find as many great opportunities to create these rain gardens in Ward 2, and hopefully it catches on like speed humps did over time. I appreciate the seconder, and that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any discussion on that, so we'll go straight to the vote. We'll go straight to the vote as soon as it comes up. Here we go. It's on the screen. And that carried unanimously, did it? I was having trouble understanding what was showing up on your screen. Yes, okay, that carried unanimously. Thank you. Item 11.3 is a request for tree supply in Ward 6. Councillor Jackson, please introduce your motion, sir.
Thank you, Chair Vanderbeek. Moved by myself, seconded by the very hard-working councillor from Ward 5, Chad Collins. Request for tree supply Ward 6, whereas increasing the urban tree canopy by providing trees has many environmental benefits to the residents of Ward 6 and the wider city, whereas the provision of trees to be planted on private property is not currently funded under existing tree planting programs, whereas the residents of Sherwood Rise have requested trees be planted adjacent to their properties and the Confederation Square apartment complexes located at 1195-1205 Fennel East, whereas the property manager of the Confederation Square Apartments has agreed to plant the trees and provide ongoing maintenance to the trees, therefore be it resolved, A, the supply and distribution of approximately 30 1.5 meter, approximately 6 foot tall spruce trees at an upset cost of $4,500 be funded from my Ward 6 Special Capital Reinvestment Reserve, the numbers noted, and B, that the mayor and city clerk be authorized, directed to execute any required agreements, ancillary documents with such conditions and terms in a form satisfactory to acting city solicitor Michael Kine. And just briefly, Madam Chair, a number of my colleagues have done a purchase for private tree planting, generally speaking, across their wards. This is my first time, and I suspect I'll be doing mine as more of a targeted, site-specific approach, which this motion here recommends. And I've worked closely with Manager Sam Scarlett of our Forestry Division. He helped me with the language of this motion. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Collins. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I don't have any speakers requested, so the motion can be voted on and vote is on the screen. And that carries unanimously. And we'll move on to item 11.4, which is dynamic speed signs for Ward 6. Councillor Jackson, please introduce that motion too, please.
Thank you again, Chair Vanderbeek. Moved by myself and seconded by, again, the extremely continuously hardworking Ward 5 Councillor Chad Collins. Dynamic speed signs for Ward 6. Whereas the City of Hamilton's committed to creating safe neighborhoods and vibrant communities through the Vision Zero Action Plan. Whereas ensuring the safety of both pedestrians and motorists is a priority, therefore be it resolved A, that staff be authorized, directed to take the required steps to purchase 12 new dynamic speed signs to be permanently installed on Upper Ottawa Street, 2 units, Fennel Avenue, 2 units, Mohawk Road, 4 units, Concession Mountain Brow, 2 units, and Upper Gage Avenue, 2 units. B, all costs associated with the installation of the traffic calming measures at these locations be funded from the Ward 6 Special Capital Reinvestment Reserve, the number noted, at an upset limit, including contingency, not to exceed $57,000, and C, the mayor and city clerk execute the agreements with such terms and conditions that acting city solicitor Michael Kine will approve of. Madam Chair, this again has come, as most things do through Ward 6, through grassroots requests and petitions and community engagement. And I'm very pleased, again, working very closely with traffic staff, primarily Superintendent Dave Ferguson and his staff, that I know that these, I call them the digital speed signs, but they're officially known as dynamic speed signs. These are for the main arteries of Ward 6. And again, will help as an additional tool to what our police services are trying to do with increased traffic safety enforcement that they provide, but they always like it when there's additional city tools that help them with the enforcement. And these flashing speed signs have become very popular. And for those listening in from Ward 6, Madam Chair, I've been asked many times, there were 2 original signs on Upper Ottawa from Fennel to the Brow. They were there temporarily for a couple of years, and people wondered what happened to them the last few months. They were relocated to another part of Ward 6 for a little greater urgency. Staff have already committed over and above this motion to reinstall those 2 digital signs on Upper Ottawa between Fennel and the Brow as well, which I'm grateful for. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And I see no one asking for discussion on this, so we'll go right to the vote. There it is on the screen. And that passes unanimously. Thank you. Now we have notices of motion. Item 12.1 is a notice of motion for safety review on the North Service Road between Fruitland Road and DeWitt Road. And that's Ward 10. Councillor Pearson, please introduce your notice of motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And it's a notice motion moved by myself. I'm going to leave it as a notice of motion. It's with regards to a request that I put forward to staff. I don't know that I need to read it off now, but it's for a traffic calming speed reduction around a bend on the North Service Road, east of DeWitt Road and before Fruitland Road. So actually, I just noticed I got a call from Dave Ferguson because I wanted to speak to him about it. So I'm going to leave it on as a notice of motion at this time, Madam Chair, if that's okay with committee.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Item 12.2, private tree giveaway in Ward 7. Councillor Pauls, I understand you'll be moving to waive the rules of order to allow for this to be introduced as a motion.
Yes.
May I please have a seconder on the motion to waive the rules of order?
I think Councillor Danko from Ward 8.
Okay. Is there any discussion on waiving the rules? No? Then we need an electronic vote. It'll be on your screen. And that passes unanimously. Could you please introduce your motion, and could you please give us a seconder on that motion if
Thank
you
you.
have one.
It's-
Otherwise, I'll find one.
No, I've got one. Councillor Danko, John Paul Danko from Ward 8. I want to thank him for that. And I'll read the motion. Whereas the city of Hamilton has declared a climate emergency. Whereas increasing the urban tree canopy by providing trees for planting on private property has many environmental benefits of the residents of Ward 7 and the wider city. And whereas private tree giveaways are not currently funded under the existing tree planting program, therefore, be it resolved that the supply and distribution of approximately 200 small native trees at a cost of $2,715 be funded from the Ward 7 discretionary fund account, and that the mayor and city clerk be authorized and directed to execute any required agreements and ancillary documents with such terms and conditions in a form as satisfactory to the city solicitor. And I just want to say that since this program, Trees Please, has been in motion, that I had a lot of people call me from Ward 7, and I am happy to put this forward and give them trees. It's good for all. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And I don't see any speakers on that, so we'll go straight to an electronic vote. It's on the screen. And that passes unanimously. Point 3 is the installation of traffic calming measures at various locations throughout Westdale and the Ainsley Wood neighborhoods in Ward 1. Councillor Nan, please introduce your notice of motion.
Thank you, Chair Vanderbeek. I'm sponsoring this motion on behalf of Councillor Wilson, and it's going to remain as a notice of motion as it appears. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other notices of motion that are not on the list? I don't see any. We'll move on to item 13, which is general information and other business. Item 13.1 is amendments to the outstanding business list. Is there any discussion on any of those?
Nope, move it.
Sorry, Councillor Pearson is moving it. Okay.
Moving it.
Right. And I need a seconder. Councillor Nan. So moved by Councillor Pearson and seconded by Councillor Nan. The vote is on the screen.
I'm in favor.
Councillor Pearson, I think you're on.
Yeah, my e-scribe just went down. I'm in favor. Sorry.
Okay, no problem. And that's, yes, I was just checking to make sure Councillor Pearson was on there. So that passes 9-0. And members of committee, do you wish to move into closed session to discuss item 14.1? Those are closed session minutes from April the 19th. Okay, then I will need a mover and a seconder to approve the closed session minutes of the May 3rd, in the May 3rd meeting as presented. Sorry. Councillor Ferguson. Sorry, I'm missing something here. So a mover and a seconder. I'm sorry, I saw Councillor Pearson's hand. Is that correct? You're removing it? And Councillor Jackson's thumb. So moved by Councillor Pearson, seconded by Councillor Jackson's thumb, that we approve the closed session minutes of the, why does this say May 3rd meeting? Okay, the April 19th meeting. Just checking. The vote's on the screen. I thought I was missing something. Nope, no problem. And did that carry? Councillor Marula? A thumb, yep. And that carries? Okay. All right, now we do have some private and confidential items. And so that will be, I'm just checking. We have one private and confidential item, 14.2. May I have a mover and seconder to move into closed session respecting item 4.2? Pursuant, I've got a blurb to read here. Pursuant to section 9.1, subsections E, F, and K of the city's procedural bylaw 21-021 and section 239.2, subsections E, F, K, and EF and K of the Ontario Municipal Act 2001 is amended as the subject matter pertains to litigation of potential litigation, including matters, including matters before the administrative tribunals affecting the municipality or local board. The receiving of advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose. A position plan, procedure, criteria, or instruction to be applied to any negotiations carried on or to be carried on by or on behalf of the municipality or local board. I need a mover and a seconder. So let's go back. That was Councillor Pearson. And no, that was the last one. Councillor Ferguson is moving it. Who's seconding it? To moving camera. Councillor Jackson. And the vote's on the screen. And it looks like Councillor Nan may be having a problem, so she's voting in the affirmative. And that carries 9-0. Members of the public are advised that during the closed session portion of the meeting, the live stream will broadcast a closed session in progress message on the screen. The broadcast will resume when the closed session is complete. Committee will wait up to 5 minutes upon reconvening in open session before proceeding with the meeting to provide members of the public and the media time to return. And don't forget to move back into open session on your e-scribe. So you can vote. Do I do the 14.2 before 10 point? We do 10 first? No, 14. Okay. Okay. Are we back?
Just give us one quick moment, please.
You can have two.
Thank you. Back.
Welcome back. We're back in open session. It is May the 3rd Public Works Committee meeting, and we will be dealing with item 14.2 from the in-camera section of the agenda. May I please have a mover and seconder to defer the report LS 21011 and PW 21024 respecting management and processing of the city's of the City of Hamilton's green cart material to the May 17th Public Works Committee meeting. I need a mover and a seconder. Moved by Councillor Ferguson. Oh, excuse me. The clerk's waving at me.
Through you, Madam Chair. This is Alicia Davenport from Clerks. Just wanting to clarify that the vote also is to keep the report confidential, as well as approve the direction to staff provided in closed session.
Yes, you're right. I didn't go far enough down the page. You're quite right. So a mover, Councillor Ferguson, seconded by Councillor Jackson. Deferring the report, etc., to the 17th of May and the direction provided to staff in closed session be approved and remain confidential. Councillor Pauls, are you able to vote? And that carries unanimously. And we're going back to, since item 10.3 was deferred until after the in-camera item 14.2, we'll consider it now. Item 10.3 is the award of the request for proposal for the management and processing of the City of Hamilton's green cart material. May I please have a mover and seconder to defer this report to the May 17th Public Works Committee meeting? Moved by Councillor Pearson, seconded by Councillor Ferguson. Thank you. Any discussion? Oh, there is no discussion on a deferral. And so the vote will be on the screen. And that carries unanimously.
Motion to adjourn.
May I please have a mover and a seconder to adjourn? Moved by Councillor Ferguson, seconded by Councillor Pearson. And we need an electronic vote, so don't go away till you vote. And that carries. Thank you for your time today, and that concludes the Public Works Committee meeting for May the 3rd.